So, welcome to today's podcast. I'm super excited today. I've got a tremendous guest. I know you're going to get so much value from his expertise and background. We have Toby Mathis here. Your list of things about you is too long, so I'll get a snippet of it. He's an attorney, entrepreneur, author, tax expert. I don't know what else. Maybe black belt taekwondo. Who the heck knows? But he's the founding partner. Founding partner of Anderson Law Group, director of Anderson Infinity Investing. He's a managing partner and president of Anderson Business Advisors, which focus on asset protection, tax planning, estate planning. So, and he's you go anywhere around social media and the internet, you're going to find Toby everywhere. He's just so generous with his education and putting it out there for people in a whole host of ways. So I'm really honored, Toby, for you to join me and spread your knowledge and wisdom to my audience.
You're too kind, and the only thing you got to know about me is I'm just a regular dude. Nothing was special. Came out of nothing. I remember when I started practicing law. I'm an attorney, but I think I had a 400 square foot studio in Seattle. Didn't have two nickels to rub together, so very familiar with that feeling. And was very, very lucky to have good mentors. That's it.
Wonderful. Listen, I know you put in a lot of work and effort, and you're humble, I could tell, so what I was saying before we start recording here, the book, which I highly encourage you to go get it, Infinity Investing, which I love that. I love the name of that. How the rich get richer and how you can do the same. So it's simple, sounds great, and sometimes there's more fluff than reality. But when you read this, there's a lot of tangible things for you to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But at the time of this recording, there's a lot going on in the economy. There's threat of recessions, inflation, and I get asked often what the heck to do. So I like to step back and sort of go with fundamentals, right? And Toby, you've experienced and seen through all your different work so many ways people are building wealth. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your background, if you can, and we'll talk through any sort of the key things that you've learned over the course of just seeing so many wealthy people succeed. Like, what do you take away from? So let's start with your background a little bit. I know you're humble about it, but kind of take us back a little bit where this all started.
Before I became an attorney, I'll tell you this. So my dad worked for Boeing, 30 years, retired, was pretty not happy. A lot of the corporate folks don't really have a life after their corporate world, and he was no exception. He would not let me come to Boeing. I think in the 30 years he worked there, I went to his office twice. And he would make me hang out with his buddies that owned small business. He says, "This is the way. This is the way." So I had that seed planted to, don't work for the man, which there's nothing wrong with it, right? But I just, that was a steady drum. But he didn't run a small business and he didn't invest. So there wasn't anything he could really do. So he tried to pawn me off on all of his friends and, free labor, or take my kid to lunch and tell him all your secrets and he'll work for you for free type stuff. And so I would do a lot of those types of deals. But it was really when I was in high school, a friend of mine named Rob Getty, his dad, Jerry, was a liquidator and had a couple of stores in Seattle. And we would go all over the countryside. He'd go all over the world. And I would go to ASD, AMD shows down in Vegas, selling anything and everything. This was back in the day before the internet. So if you were liquidating anything, you actually had to know somebody of where to get rid of it. And so it involves warehouses, logistics, getting things all over the world, sometimes getting them out of the United States. Like we did disposal for some of the large retailers, and they just don't want their product showing up competing with their product, right? So sometimes it's just get it out of the US. Sometimes it's auctions, sometimes it's bankruptcy, sometimes it's receiverships, but you're getting all sorts of crazy stuff and you're going all over the place. And so the reason I'm telling you this story is because it was actually one of those instances that led to me becoming an attorney. And it was Bush Tower Group was part of the liquidation of Pay and Pack. And if you remember, Pay and Pack was a hardware store in the West Coast. And they went bankrupt, I think it was in the 80s. And Bush Tower Group is a big warehouse. Bush Sr. Had an interest, but it was a bunch of warehouses and they had Chinese fixtures. And we had a buyer in Mexico, and the big question at the time was whether you could sell Chinese merchandise into Mexico from the U.S. There was a legal issue that was hanging over our heads. So we retained a firm in downtown Seattle. Spent I think it was a $10,000 retainer, and I think they spent every nickel of it, and gave a nice big thick opinion that didn't really tell us what to do. And I remember Jerry being like, okay, so you told me that speeding is going over 55, but what happens if I go over 55, right? Like, he was kind of like, what's the recourse here? Like, what's our risk? And they were kind of like, well, you can't do it, and he's like, but what if I did, right? So we ended up using deadheaders and getting it into Mexico and giving them all. Deadheaders just means trucks that have extra space in the back. So we would throw pallets onto trucks that weren't full. Sounds horrible, right? But it was actually perfectly legal. And at the end of the day, it wasn't an issue for Mexico. There was no real remedy. There was just some bureaucrats spewing some paper. And Jerry says, man, if we listen to these guys, we'd never make any money. And so he said to his son and I, you guys need to go to law school. So Rob went to law school. I went to law school. Jerry ended up going to law school. He got kicked out within 6 months because you'd tell the professors that they were full of it. Like, well, I imagine a lot of your audience would probably do the same thing. They'd be like, that's not actually how it works. So you get a lot of folks that teach out of a book, and it's not very effective. So long story short is I became an attorney, not because I was like, hey, I'm going to go be Matlock, but because we wanted to be better business people and wanted to be independent. Fast forward, 26, 20, whatever, however many years. It's a lot longer than that, but I've been an attorney since 97. So what is that, 26 years as an attorney? And this was probably, 4 or 5 years before that. So it's been quite a while since that occurred. But now Anderson, over 500 employees worldwide. We do more than 10,000 tax returns for investors every year. And I get to work with tens of thousands of business owners and investors. And all I do is watch and learn, right? You start seeing patterns. So your most successful investors have similar qualities, and they invest in a lot of the same things. And you start noticing those patterns. So about 10 years ago, I started really trying to document that. And I ended up writing that book, Infinity Investing, which I tried to bring it down to real simple terms as to how these folks, the majority of them, the vast majority, as in like super majority, are consistently making money. And it's through 5 income sources. And anybody could build their portfolio to do the same thing. Anybody could build their life to do the same thing. I have over, between myself and my partner, have over 300 properties, everything from commercial buildings, apartment complexes, manufactured homes, a lot of single family. So I can feel your pain, Tom. Like, we have hundreds of single families that you're just like, some days you just want to burn them all down, but other days you think they're great. But it's the joys of real estate. So, but we do exactly what our clients do, and we try to teach exactly what the successful ones do, so that you can get similar results. And it's not rocket science. If you do the things that the successful do, you're probably going to reap the same results. Which is why I said what the rich do, and how you could do the same.
Yeah, no, and it's unfortunately in the world we live in, which is we were, before we started recording, talked about access is so information, it's sometimes hard to figure out what's even right. We get bombarded every day from MSNBC or wherever you get it from, that what you're supposed to do with your money. And in a lot of ways, when I was kind of assessing this in my own personal life, I kind of felt, which I think you described, like imprisoned in some respect, right? That you're beholden to a system, and you kind of just fall into it, and you say, yeah, this is where everyone else is hanging out. I might as well hang out here. But when you really look around, you're like, well, there's another group of other people that are not in the same room. What are they doing, right? How did they break free? So, what are some of the things from your vantage point that you see broadly that keeps most people sort of, I guess, imprisoned or under control with their financial life?
Lack of financial knowledge and indifference. But you said something there. It was kind of funny. So when I wrote Infinity Investing, I was using the term financial slavery. Like, you literally have MasterCard. Like, it says it right on it. So I'm always like wondering who's the servant. Well, right. Debt is probably the worst thing that we have going out there, and misunderstanding the difference between debt and leverage. I'm never somebody to sit here and say, debt to me is a bad word. And I say debt is because it's a loan against a liability. So when you buy a house and you have a big mortgage, that could really hurt you. When you buy a really nice car and you have a big car payment, that can really hurt you because you bought something that's going to cost you money with money that costs you, and you're getting doubled up on. And so when you see these people, I call it like a golden cage. They're in their 40s, they're doing well, they have the Lexus, they have the nice house, and they're absolutely suffocating. They start drinking, they start doing drugs, they start playing around, they're doing anything to get a release of that pressure that they feel. And they're unaware that they've just loaded themselves with, you may as well put a backpack of bricks on. And you're wondering why your legs are always tired, right? And it's like, well, you got anybody that is in my shoes and probably your shoes, you're looking at it going, well, you got a backpack of bricks. And well, what should I do? Start unloading it, and it's like, okay, well, what are those bricks? That would be debt. That would be liabilities. That would be living above your means. And it's gonna harm you over a long period of time. And, some of you guys might go like, oh, Toby, you're being elitist or whatever. It's like, no, it's just real. It's like going into a doctor's office and you have a knife sticking in your leg, and then you're like, yeah, my leg hurts. You got a knife in it. Oh, shoot, really? Yeah, and it's like you might be oblivious to it, and to anybody else that does this stuff day in and day out, it's obvious, and it's just a factor of income and expenses and assets and liabilities. And once you calculate those, it takes about 0.3 seconds to figure out where the problem is.
Yeah, and it's amazing to your point. Like when you put it that simply, it's straightforward, and obviously a lot of folks who are listening to it are super successful in their careers or businesses, but what I took from a lot of what you share is the things are simple. It's just sometimes the order of how things happen really matter, right? In terms of deploying, creating income from assets instead of securing liabilities, right? And so just the direction and flow of things in terms of your financial life can really make a really significant difference in the long run. And to one being on the constant treadmill, if you will, versus now I have the freedom to do whatever the heck I want, right? It's just switching the order. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, the actual title is Infinity Investing, and it just means building income streams that don't die with you. So a lot of times we get enamored with our great labor and getting big paychecks and things like that, which is you. The problem is anybody who's been around estate planning or any sort of legal planning around lives is life is full of the unexpected. People lose jobs, they get sick, they get hit by cars, they get, lots of things can take you out, and then there's passing away, which is inevitable. We have a 100% chance of dying, and it's just a matter of when. And then we're not really planning for any of those things. And they're pretty obvious planning points, right? It's like, well, what happens if one day Tom is plucked from the world? He's not able to do things on his own. He may be in a hospital bed. It may be, I had a client once that went on they were chasing gold. They were going after old gold digs. And they were in a foreign country looking for gold. And they got a fungus in their brain, inflamed their brain. They're in a coma for 6 months. What happens during that time? I could tell you in this case, he didn't have any documentation to allow anybody to step into his shoes. And he had multiple foreclosures begun. Nobody was paying his bills. His mom's going crazy. Nobody can act on his behalf. Nobody will share information. There wasn't anything documented anywhere. And sometimes it's just having somebody tap you on the shoulder saying, what about this? And I don't care how successful you are as a business owner, there's always something we can do better. Right. And so it's just being open to being a humble student and saying, here's some things I could do better. So if I just said to anybody, what happens if you pass tomorrow? Do I know who your friends are? Do I know who to notify? If you were military, do I know what type of honors? Do I know how to write your obituary? How do I access your Instagram or your Facebook? All these things are like little basic things that we never really deal with. Right. we have a free emergency binder. I'll give you the link, where everybody can document that type of stuff. I actually believe so wholeheartedly we don't charge on things like that. So it's a binder. It goes everything, like medical, dental. Where do my kids, what do they like to do? What are their hobbies and things like that? Because none of us want to think about it. But if mom and dad were gone, who's going to take care of those kids? Do we have guardianship documents? Like, what do they know about? Who are their friends? All that stuff is actually really important, and it doesn't exist anywhere except maybe in the family knowledge base, right? So this is where we could start documenting those things, and anybody can do it. It's actually pretty simple, but the entirety of our life is like that. So you're talking about business owners. Do you have a buy sell? Do you have key man insurance? Do you have a transition? Do you have a legal entity around the business so that it doesn't die along with you? All those things are very simple questions, right? It takes 5 minutes to get an answer, but we never ask them. And so sometimes that's the secret. It's just sitting there going over and saying, like, if I'm looking at somebody's finances, I'm looking for 5 income types. I'm looking for rents, royalties, dividends, interest, and short-term capital gains on option sales. That's about it. I'm just looking at those. Why? Because they don't rely on you. Those things are going to come in whether you're here or not. And I'm going to start tallying that up to figure out whether it's enough to cover your expenses. Now I know, how, what's going to happen if you're incapacitated or if you're not able to work. I could see and actually calculate how many days, you got before we're selling everything off. And for a lot of people, successful people especially, that number's surprisingly low. Like,
Yeah.
they're not, you lose your job, and in about 3 months, you are really upside down and hurting. And we all got a great lesson in this in 2008. Figure 8, 9, and 10 was just catastrophic, right? And you saw everybody knew somebody who was rich. They had a great house, big mortgage. And, I wish I had a nickel every time somebody says I have $1 million house, but they'll only give me $350 for it. Right? It's like, well, it might not be $1 million house then, right? I got all this real estate and it's worth so much money and I can't get a loan. Well, that second portion about it's worth a lot of money, I could just tell you, real estate was, we were buying stuff pennies on the dollars back then. What happens if that occurs in your situation? And if you do not have those, so again, rents, royalties, dividends, interest, short-term capital gains, if you don't have those, then you need them. And the most successful people who create awesome legacies, in other words, not just for their family, but for their kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids, kids' kids, right? If you want a legacy, if you want something that's going to go on for hundreds of years, and that is not a big ask, by the way, because I could show anybody how to do it. With a guy like Tom, I could do this with anybody, no matter how wealthy you are, because we could insure your life. As long as we have the vehicle, we can then fund that vehicle at any time. We can fund it during our lifetime, and we start creating these income lines. Or if you didn't quite get there and you pass away, then there should be insurance proceeds that dump into, usually we're using a living trust, but you're creating a plan of what happens to that money. So like, let's say I think I was, in my family, my dad was the first one to go to college in his whole family. It's kind of crazy, right? On that side of the family, it's just that was very, how would you say, not rich, right? Deep South, poor. It might be really important to him that all of his, family, his kids, his grandkids, everybody gets to go to college, right? That may have been a big thing. It wasn't for my dad, but let's just pretend it was. We could have just life insurance on him, term policy, cheap, have a trust that the money goes in and it's there for education for descendants, and boom, you've got something that's going to sit there and work for many, many years, because it's usually about 30 years between inheritances, between generations. So you sit here and you have all this time for it to grow, and it grows and grows and grows. And if you work, again, a guy like Tom, you understand the ideas in infinite banking and how do cash values work. And there's huge tax benefits under Section 7702 with the cash values of policies. If you do the right type of policy, then it doesn't matter whether you die or not. Like, you're still going to build up a opportunity to generate, like, maybe the policy itself is not going to generate you the type of income you want. Maybe it's dividends, maybe you're getting a dividend every year, but you could borrow against it and then put it into things like real estate and other things and lever those and into great income. And I use the term lever instead of debt because it's very different. You lever assets. So when you borrow against a policy, it's not a one-sided transaction. You're still building up cash value at the same time, depending on the policy. You guys know how all this stuff works, but that interest, you're going to be buying things that create more income than covers not that interest, but also give you a little bit of a grease on top. You're getting a nice return. The wealthy do this. The Rockefellers are probably the best example of a family that went from massive wealth to consistently growing wealth, and they do so through using financial vehicles. They do it to the T, like where you just have massive wealth growing in multiple generations, a lot of it philanthropic, which is also an earmark of somebody who's probably done well, is that they're also a big giver. We see this stuff over and over again, and it's just sharing it with people so that they're able to do the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff. I mean, and then, there's so much packed in there and, but there's a lot of things in there that just are not widely shared or understood. And certainly when you get into the world of getting on that treadmill and sort of, to your point, feeling suffocating, it almost feels like there's no way off. And it is trying to reverse the course. And it's not going to happen overnight. But he does always tell people all the time, like, what got you here today wasn't overnight either. And to turn the tides and switch the gears so you have like some, I call it tailwinds behind you. Most people have headwinds coming at them in terms of building wealth. Building things that are going to give you tailwinds to accelerate it. And these are the type of concepts and smart leverage, right? Whether it's people, smart debt to buy assets that are going to be doing it in a very rigid way to make sure you're investing in things you understand and are going to serve you in multiple ways, not just one. That does take some learning. This is part of it. That's why we have people like Toby to share these things, because there are ways to maximize the use of your dollars versus what I consider siloing everything. That's what a lot of stuff happens today. And it might serve one purpose, but just like you described, Toby, I want my dollars to do as many jobs as humanly possible, right? Whether it be protections, cash flow, growth. I want it, tax savings. I like it to do more than one thing. It's not I call it, I don't like to talk about ors. I like ands. I like to do things and then something else. I like peanut butter and jelly, right? I like to live a beautiful life and make money and spend time with my family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like to live in that side of it, and what you're talking about, that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that, by the way. I like that. I like the ands because it isn't an or usually. Like sometimes there's an or if it's my labor. Like there's only so much time, so I can't do this. I either do this or. So a lot of you guys spend too much time at work. You're saying either I work my butt off and make money, or I go to my kids' t-ball game, right? Like you don't want to be in that situation. You want to make money and go to your. I like that. I'm just totally going to steal it, Tom. But you're hitting the nail on the head on it. Is a lot of times it's just knowing the right people who can actually look at it and give you an honest assessment. And I'll tell you, like most financial planners, I use an analogy. I say when you're walking in, and no offense to your profession, I don't know if you're a fiduciary or not, but I'm just going to.
I am.
Yeah. Okay. So then you'll appreciate this because you walk into the butcher, and we've all gone into the butcher shop, and you see all these beautiful cuts of meat, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh. But what if you went up to them and said, hey, what should I eat this week? Will you help me plan my menu? They're going to have you eating meatballs and veal chops and all sorts of like big chunks of steak. You're going to have so much red meat. You're just going to, your iron's going to be really high, right? But they're going to have you eating whatever's in there, whatever they're selling. You walked into a butcher and you asked for advice. That's a lot of our financial services. And I would say I juxtapose that versus going in and you're talking to a doctor. Let's say you go to a nutritionist. And you say, hey, could you help me plan my menu? I could tell you what they're going to do. They're going to measure your macros, and they're going to say, hey, you got to eat this many carbohydrates, and you get your lean meats and green vegetables, and you got to eat this time, this time, this time. They're not telling you to eat a big steak every night. Maybe if you do the carnivore diet, they would. But a nutritionist is never going to lead you down that direction, right? They're going to be very balanced, and the reason being is that the nutritionist is a fiduciary. They are looking at your best interest, whereas the butcher is not. They're looking at their best interest. And a lot of times we get them confused. And so we'll go to the butcher and ask them to give us financial advice. And they sell us everything under the sun. It's a bunch of mutual funds that have massive fees. It's a bunch of crap that's not going to actually make us any money. And you're not going to be getting any closer to financial independence and freedom as a result. And usually it's about 20 years in when you realize that, wow, I'm just not, it doesn't seem to be moving. My 401k is just not growing. Why is that? You've been getting your financial advice from a butcher. You need to make sure that you're going to people who have to put your interest first. So fiduciaries have to put your interest first. If I went into and called up my local insurance agent and I said, what does my financial plan look like? I can tell you it's going to be insurance, maybe an annuity. What is it not going to include? Real estate. What is it not going to include? Short-term notes or lending. What is it not going to include? Anything that involves multifamily, manufactured homes, pad splits, doing house hacking, short-term rentals, anything along those lines. Like, you'd be lucky to get a REIT out of them. They're going to put you in a mutual fund, or they're going to put you in to life insurance or annuities. That's it, right? They have that's what's in their butcher cabinet, nothing else. And once they exhaust those, then they'll say, but if you're still hungry, we have some more, right? They're not looking at the things that are actually going to create a balanced and diverse portfolio that's going to create multiple income streams for you that will last for generations. That's not what they're doing. They're looking at something that's very transactional and gets whatever their product is that makes them the most money and the most commission out the door. And, you're buying it. And at the end of the day, you're going to look at yourself, and no different than if you followed the butcher's advice and ate steak every day for 20 years, you're probably going to have some health results, right? Maybe not very positive, probably some pretty negative results depending on what you're eating. And whether or not you have a round diet. And so you find out when you're sick, right? And all of a sudden you're like, God, why do I feel miserable all the time? Why am I so fat? And all these things, right? And we get the triggers. We're feeling that too financially. And sometimes, again, I'll use this because it identifies you too, Tom. I'm a fiduciary. And so when I look at somebody, I'm looking at it and I can spot it pretty quickly. Wow, you've been eating a lot of fat for the last 20 years, right? Like, we just look at your blood. Like, your doctor it would take them 3.2 seconds, right? They look at it and they go, geez, Tom, what the heck you been eating? Well, I went to my butcher and he's been eating a lot of sausage, right? A lot of things, a lot of veal, a lot of some prime rib this week, right? So you can usually tell when you're the fiduciary pretty quickly what somebody's been consuming, and there's no difference in finance. You could tell pretty quickly when you start looking at their numbers what they've been consuming.
Now I'm going to be stealing that from you now. I love that. I love that sort of that analogy, and it is true. That's the thing I experienced. And you said it took me about 20 years, right, to figure this out from being on the other end of this to realize exactly how you're describing it. It's such a siloed nature, and the lack of coordination around people's financial lives is causing a lot of damage for people. And they might not know it until it's potentially too late in some cases, or they've been basically bleeding money for years and years and years that never reach their family and enter their lives. And so that is definitely the vantage point I have, and it's like a absolutely spot on analogy, and it's an unfortunate thing, but just like we see in a lot of different industries, and my wife's a teacher in education, and it's so hard sometimes to innovate and go outside your own lane for a lot of reasons, like incentive wise, like you just said, Toby. Like, I'm making a killing in X, Y, and Z sort of space here. Why would I change it, even though it might actually benefit the client? Well, it's tough. It's incentives drive a lot of things, and we know this. And so it's recognizing what the incentive from the person you're talking to in any respect, right? But I also think of it too, just like we're here today. You guys are listening to this today. You're taking ownership and learning, right? And I always tell this to a lot of people, clients, even though I'm not here to manage your money, you have to own it for yourself, your family, for the people around you that matter. You've got to own it, right? Because if you don't, then you're basically in the back seat, and who knows where you're driving, right? And you just got to get the right people to give you advice and give you direction and coaching, like Toby and his organizations, because then you can drive it to massive success under your terms.
Tom, you said something that reminds me. So years back, actually more than a few years back, they start to jumble, right? I was talking to a group and I used the victim statements of the Bernie Madoff. You remember Bernie Madoff just ripped everybody off? there were so many victim statements that were, I gave him all my money. All of my retirement was with Bernie, and they lost everything, right? And they're giving these victim statements, and I kind of use this in a mean way. I'm like, you abdicated your responsibility, right? You were responsible for your financial. Like, we can't put it on somebody else. So like, you don't manage everybody's stuff. I don't manage everybody's stuff. What I do is I say, here's how people usually are diversified, and here's what I would be buying if it was me. And that's how I tend to work. And if you want to work with a money manager, I use a 30-30-30-10 rule. So I'm like 30% should be in income producing stocks, dividend producing stocks, dividend kings, aristocrats, write your covered calls, do your cash secured puts. 30% should be in real estate or real estate equivalents. That's where your REITs live. That's where your single family homes, your multifamily, and that 30% should be in managed money, where you're using somebody else's expertise to help you guide. Either maybe you're copying somebody else's portfolio, or maybe you're using a traditional money manager. Usually they're 1% or less, and let them manage a portion of your portfolio so it's not all on you. And then 10% in cash equivalents, like your Bitcoin, your US dollars, your gold and silver, something that's liquid. And I just say, like, hey, that's really what you should be shooting for as far as diversification. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's not like we're going to say, hey, you have too much real estate, you should never invest in real estate. If there's a good deal that comes along, but be cognizant that you're overweight in that area, right? So if there's a major downturn like we saw in the recession, it might be a tough go for you a little bit. Right? But you're better off kind of spreading these things out. And that's just the earmarks of what we see for successful folks over and over and over again, is that they tend to have diversity. It's really easy to do that, but it's your responsibility. It's easy to look at it, but you can't hand that to somebody else saying you do it. You still got to be watching that person or that group. It's up to us. And if I'm talking to a bunch of business owners, you're already that A-type personality that's doing it, right? You're already a responsible party, because you said, I'm going to bypass the W-2 and I'm going to go out there and do it myself. You're already kind of messed up. Like, I know who I'm talking about, right? Like, hang your shingle out day one out of law school. It's a recipe for pain and suffering for a few years. Long term, fantastic. But I remember, like, people looking at me like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "I didn't go to law school to become a lawyer, but I want to help people, and I like to, and I have to learn things, and I learn by doing. So I have to run this as a small business." That's a sidebar, by the way. Is don't listen to people that don't do what you do. If you're working with professionals, make sure they're doing what they're talking about. If you're working with accountants, make sure that they know your area, what you're investing in. They should be in real estate. If you're doing real estate, you don't want to go to H&R Block and have them do your Schedule E. It's almost 100% chance to be wrong, by the way, according to the Treasury Inspector General. In all their studies, the chain preparers screwed up every single return that they checked on all the investment and business side. So, like, that's not a good place to go. You got to go to somebody who actually does what you do. For attorneys, you don't go to an attorney who doesn't do real estate. If you do real estate, you don't go to an attorney that doesn't know how to run a small business. If you're trying to run a small business, they just won't know all the issues. It's just one of those weird things. You kind of have to do it. It makes a huge difference, by the way, and who you're listening to. Because when you change that out and you're dealing with people that actually know what you're doing, you'll be shocked at how much value there is. They may even be more expensive, but the value of what they're bringing is astronomically higher. And so you end up making a lot more because of it.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in or learned from trying to cheat my way to financial stability and wealth. And I quickly learned that this is, one, not enjoyable, and two, it actually was ruining my ability to build wealth. And so these days I have grown very much on the side of things cost is what you pay, value is what you get. And so you got to be careful where you're putting your money and trying to do everything on the cheap, because to Toby's point, that advice may not be all that good and could in some cases be detrimental to you. Listen, I used to buy like cheap shoes, and what happens? They run out, right? They wear and tear quickly. They don't last, right? And so now I buy nice shoes because I like them and they're comfortable, and I'll keep them for a long time, right? In the long run, it's way better. But you can easily get caught in that sort of cheap trap, right? And not think about long term, which I'm very much a long-term thinker, and I hope to be here till 100 years at least, hopefully. I think I estimate 90 if my son actually does what he's supposed to do and has a grandkid someday. I'll be 90 to see my great grandkids. So I've already mapped that out, but we'll see how that plays out.
That's
Nothing
perfect.
works out. But no, this has been awesome, Toby. I really appreciate all your wisdom and time, and I know you're crazy busy. What's got you super excited for this year as we kind of record this early in 2024? Like, what's on the horizon for you in life, business, anything?
Yeah, well, what's got me jazzed? I think that the next 2 years we're going to see lower interest rates, so you're going to see a much hotter market. I'm a real estate guy, so I'm kind of excited to see what comes out. I I was one of the people that was saying, not because it's after the fact and true, but I was saying like I don't see the market dying. Everybody was like, "Oh, we're 2008 again." I was like, we had $200,000 average, appreciation, equity in properties, and like 80% of the loans are below 3%. I can't see us having a 2008. I just didn't think it was possible. And you saw the market continue to tick up a little bit, maybe go down in certain places where it was overheated. But overall, nationwide, we were up. I think we're going to see maybe a little bit of a stale market here, but in the next 3 years, you're going to see great. Like there's opportunities right now in multifamily, like crazy, of all these people that had loans that are resetting. I think it's $1.5 trillion worth of loan reset. So you're going to see a lot of people where they're cash flowing now at a lower interest rate, where all of a sudden they're knocked into a negative cash flow position and unloading properties to investors that are able to take that on. So I think you're going to see some distressed multifamily funds coming up that are going to be great. I hate to say that because you're like somebody else's misery is you're able to benefit from it. But at the end of the day, you want the tenants to not have to worry, and you want to have strong financial leadership. And you can't do that if you have somebody who's over leveraged. So the market will correct that. I'm curious as to see what happens. Statistically, usually you have a great year after the presidential election. So especially if you have a split Congress and president. So we'll see. It seems like it's all over the place right now. We're early 2024, so God knows what we're in for as far as the ride for this year. But what it tells me is that there's a lot of optimism to be had after this year. So this year is kind of the transitional year, and I'm just watching it. If the Fed starts to pivot, starts lowering interest rates, which if you look at their financial projections, they're projecting to go down to 4.6% in the next year. So I'm like, okay, they're signaling that they're going to be pivoting and lowering. Right now, they're in the pause. They start to lower. It's usually 6 months, and you see a really positive bounce in the economy. So it'll be fun to watch when that stuff starts to occur and see how the markets react. As an investor, I'm a cash flow guy, and it's been great. The last 3 years have been off the hook. So I'm just like, hey, it's going to continue. Housing is one of those areas where we have a lot of people, not enough housing, and housing starts went down because of this whole craziness with the interest rates. So that pain is continuing to rise. We also have a lot of new residents in the United States. Everybody needs places to live, and it's a great time to be a landlord. So I don't see that changing anytime soon, which means there's plenty of opportunity to house and help solve that issue. And usually, where you're solving an issue, you get great returns. So I'm looking at that in the next year or two. I'm like, hey, there's going to be plenty of opportunities. You just have to know where they are and recognize them when they present themselves, and you'll capitalize on them.
Absolutely. No, I'm completely on board with that and agree. And to your point, that's why having some cash ready is always a good idea. And I always tell people that have even more money than you might think you need, because things are going to come your way that you don't expect as possibilities and opportunities. And so it's always good. I'd rather be on that side of it and be able to pull the trigger when needed, when they arises the opportunity. So it's always maybe feeling, it doesn't feel always great, especially when interest rates are low. I know it's higher now, but I think you'll be heavily rewarded if you're patient.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
great stuff.
And,
Great stuff.
and if you don't mind, Tom, I would just say look at your sources of capital. So a lot of people that we call keeping powder dry, keeping some cash on the side. Look at things that you have access to. So if you have cash value in an insurance policy, you can borrow against that. If you have a security backed line of credit on your account, like I have some larger stock accounts, and they give me up to 70%
Mm.
in a line of credit that I could borrow at any time, usually considerably below market. But Morgan Stanley, Raymond James, all those, Schwab even does it. But you could look at where you could access. If you have a 401k, you can borrow against that up to $50,000, up to 50% of your account. So you have these other sources. Start to look at them, even cash advanced off of certain types of credit cards. If they're business cards and they're zero interest, you might be able to, get capital to close a deal with the idea that you're going to take other types of financing or take it out or pay it off in a short period of time. But there's all these little things. You should know about them ahead of time. So if an opportunity presents itself, you're not scrambling.
No, that's great stuff. Absolutely. You may not really realize you have some of the access to that capital, and even like the HELOCs or whatever. You just be prepared, right, and see
100%.
where you have access to capital. Really great stuff. So, Toby, so how the best for folks who want to learn more about you and Infinity Investing, how to maybe take advantage of that, how best to kind of connect with you guys?
Yeah, well, I want to make sure that we know that they came from you guys. So I know that I think we have a link. I'll give it to it. But I think the easiest thing is tobymathis.com and /podcast. That's easy. Or just Google Toby Mathis and you'll find my YouTube channel. Just subscribe. We're always putting stuff out. infinityinvesting.com is another one. You can do a free membership. There's a basic membership that costs a little bit, but you can start participating and see what type of information we put out. And that's what we are. We're educators. So we're going to give you options. And then depending on what type of things spark your interest, you could do deeper dives. But for the most part, we're just, it's a simple philosophy. We use percentages on just about everything. So like, the way you're saving, we're going to use a 70-30 rule, things like that, 30-30-30-10. Do I rent or buy? We use a 5% rule. Like we have all these little things that are kind of like, hey, it will help guide you. All that stuff is accessible for free. You can take a look at it.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys are really generous. There's tons. Yeah, to your point, it's not gonna be that difficult to find Toby and all the great stuff they put out there for your benefit. And so I would highly encourage you to go seek it out. Great stuff. So Toby, thank you so much. Really, it's been a pleasure. It's great, amazing to be able to connect with people like you who've just been so successful in all the things you're doing. So thank you for sharing your time with us, and so great to meet you.
Yeah, it's been fun, and it's an honor to be on and be able to share with people. So I just say this one last thing is good luck and God bless.
Thanks, Toby.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.